From the Wycliffe Global Alliance, welcome again to the Journey podcast. I'm Phil Pryor, Director for Communication for the Alliance, and with me, as always, is Jim Killam, Managing Editor for the Alliance. Jim, you're based near Chicago in the US, and I'm over here in the UK. Most of the time we meet electronically like this, but recently we got to sit in the same space together for a few days in, of all places, Nairobi in Kenya, where the Alliance leadership team was meeting.
Yeah, and one of the great things about working with colleagues in the same place for a few days is that you get to sit at a picnic table on a warm African evening with the locusts buzzing and do a podcast interview, so that's been fun.
And for this episode, you interviewed two people we know very well. One is Hannes Wiesmann, who serves as assistant to the executive director, and the other is Joe Johnson, who serves as a consultant for prayer advocacy.
Yeah, they've come up with a new podcast, unlike anything we have heard before. And you and I both listen to a lot of podcasts, but this one's called In the Company of Travelers. It's about Christ-likeness, and okay, that's not so unusual for a topic, but the difference is that this is about organizational Christ-likeness. How can something we typically think about on an individual basis be evidenced in the culture and conduct of an entire organization?
And they are looking at this topic from many angles and also from many different parts of the world. As they talk with two organizational leaders each time in each podcast, they've consciously paired people from completely different cultures and contexts.
Yeah, I think the result of that is a much better collective view of the global body of Christ. Everyone brings different experiences and passions to these conversations. I can just imagine God smiling the whole time, like, yeah, this is how it's supposed to work.
Well, we can let Hannes and Joe tell you and us more, because here then is Jim's conversation with the two of them from Nairobi.
First of all, thank you both for making the trip to Kenya just to do this interview. We're sitting out here in near Nairobi on a beautiful African evening, and it's, 65 degrees maybe in Fahrenheit? What is that in Celsius? I don't know.
Completely blank here.
Yeah, 20 maybe. Anyway, you can probably hear some African crickets in the background, and it's a beautiful night. So this is a fun place to do this. Maybe to start, let's just hear from both of you about who you are and what you do in your day jobs, and then we'll get to the podcast subject. So Joe, why don't you start?
Sure. I have the official title of Consultant for Prayer Advocacy for the Wycliffe Global Alliance, which means that I'm here to support Alliance organizations as they seek to motivate prayer for the Bible translation movement.
Yeah, I serve as the assistant to the executive director, which means Stephen can pass on everything that he thinks I enjoy doing and can do well. So I have probably the best job on the team.
And where are you both from? And, a little bit about your backgrounds too, Joe?
Okay, so I'm from the UK. We have been part of Wycliffe since 1997 with my husband Stuart. We served in the DR Congo and later on in Francophone Africa before moving back to the UK, working with Wycliffe UK before I moved to the Alliance.
So Kenya is not an unfamiliar spot for you?
No, we used to live here. I'm always happy when I have the chance to come back and visit.
Yeah, I'm happy to come back to Africa, even though I served in West Africa together with my family for 12 years. We were in Burkina Faso. Then we went back to Switzerland, where I'm from, to serve there as director for Wycliffe Switzerland for 10 years, and then area director for the Alliance for a number of years, and now for 2-3 years in my current role.
So we're going to be talking about this podcast that the two of you are doing called In the Company of Travelers. Can you explain the name?
One of the things that the Alliance is very strong on, and Hannes and I are both passionately agree about, and we don't passionately agree about that much, is that we are not doing this life with God and serving in the mission of God alone, but we are doing it alongside, I suppose, in community. And so the idea is that we're on a spiritual journey, but we're doing it in the company of other people, so in the company of travelers.
The spiritual journey part might not be a brand new thought for people, but what would be different about what you two are hoping to accomplish with this, or what are you seeing maybe as some needs?
So the company part probably came in because we thought it would be helpful to have conversations about how to live a spiritual life as a group, as a community, as an organization. I mean, obviously organizations don't have lives per se, it's the people in the organization, but to reflect on the question how to lead, how to be in organizations informed by spirituality, and maybe more precise, how to be Christ-like as an organization.
What do you think are some of the pitfalls for organizations where that might not be happening as much as people would desire? Because everyone would desire this as a ministry organization.
I don't know if I would call it a pitfall, but there's just not that much, to our knowledge, out there in terms of information or in terms of inspiration on that topic. When we talk with people, there is interest in cultivating personal spiritual life, but there's just not that much reflection that we have come across so far on the organizational level. So
I think it's about intentionality. Every organization would say that prayer is important, but if you don't intentionally plan to pray, it's the sort of thing that doesn't happen very often. And in the same way, I think we have to intentionally pursue Christ-likeness, becoming more like Christ. It's not something that just sort of happens vaguely.
then also there is so much information and inspiration out there on how to lead an organization that has nothing to do with the spiritual life. So how to do strategy, how to take care of your people, how to make decisions. You get almost bombarded with ideas from a secular voice, and they are not necessarily bad or unhelpful, not at all. But the spiritual approach that's informed by the Gospels, how Christ lived on this earth, no, there's not that much. So that's something to discover together.
What have the two of you learned about organizational spirituality or organizational Christ-likeness, if we could, whichever term you prefer, I guess, but you're coming to this conversation with something to say.
I come more with questions.
Yeah.
Well, for myself anyway, I see lots of people in leadership roles who are worn out or close to burnout, who are trying desperately to hold everything together and lead their teams well and encourage their organization. And I just saw a great need to maybe stop and reorder our values or our priorities, because when you're serving in the mission of God, then the serving can become the most important thing. But actually, if we're not doing that in close relationship with God, then we're missing the main point of it, because God desires our hearts far more than he does our service.
And I think you both alluded to this, but this is an easier thing to visualize in an individual sense rather than a corporate sense as an organization or as a community, right? And maybe that's, especially in the West, I think maybe we think can be all exclusively individually about things like this.
Well, I appreciate you, Joe, mentioning the values. I think that's where much of this will actually be embedded, or to go more broader, the culture of an organization. I guess if we can grow into cultures that glorify God and honor Christian biblical values, then an organization will be on a good track.
And I think what I've discovered through some of the conversations with different people is that there's no one way to do this. Different cultures, different personality types are going to approach it from a different direction. So what we hope this podcast will bring is a whole host of food for thought and creative response.
what kinds of things have you heard from organizations that might indicate they're on a spiritually healthy track together?
I think when I hear that there is intentional pursuing of the Father's heart together, when I hear that they are taking time to discern God's will together and listen together, not just one or two people, but everyone is involved in that listening process. When I hear of community coming around, well, for example, Wycliffe, US, had a hurricane go through and some of their staff had so much damage to their houses that they were homeless in effect until things could be mended. And it seems that many of them just went to live with colleagues. And that was the community responding to a community need.
You touched on it, Joe. When an organization has practices, when it has rhythms that build in spiritual practices in their everyday life, I would say that's a good first approach. It can be small things, how do you begin the week, or how do you begin the day? What do you do before you start a meeting? What do you do during meetings? Do you have rhythms that reconnect you with God, to put it simply?
And we know that many alliance organizations do. So we were eager to hear about those things.
Yeah, again, just to share that among our community as an alliance, but also, like you said, Joe, different cultural contexts, different things may work, but it's like a list of things to try,
Yeah,
or a list of ideas to say, we would never even considered that before.
absolutely.
Yeah, and for me, it's one of the things that fascinates me, and invigorates me in the alliance, that we are a global community, so we can listen to people who are from totally different cultural backgrounds than we are. So Switzerland and the UK probably similarly. We are very individualistic societies. So I know I have so much to learn from people with a more community-oriented background. And that will play into it. And it's actually to our detriment, I think, the individualistic bias. So to hear people for whom this is more natural to have a communal life, I can so much learn from them.
I personally was really challenged by some of the responses to some of the questions, because simply the guests were coming at the same subject from a completely different perspective. And that challenged me to not just have a narrow view of something, but to consider many different options, I suppose. And I think we're richer for that. It's not that we necessarily change how we do something, but if we've considered it from more perspectives, thought of more ways of doing it, then I think that makes us richer.
Tell me a little bit about the format you've chosen for the podcast. You're interviewing more than one person at a time. Usually, what does that look like?
So we wanted to have the whole globe represented, and have always two guests from different parts of the world, with one of us as the host. So we were hoping to stimulate conversations between the guests and for us to learn together. And then the other person between Joe and I will then introduce the episode where we are not the host.
Tell me a little bit about maybe some of the challenges you're facing with a global group of guests. There's got to be some language issues, all sorts of things, right?
Yeah, we had at least two guests who not only English wasn't their first language, I think it probably wasn't their second or third language. And so there are some moments where the dialogue's maybe not as clear as it could be. We have tried to mitigate that by including a transcript in the show notes. It was tricky, but we just felt it was so important to have points of view that weren't limited to people who spoke English as their first language.
So I guess we would encourage listeners that if you are having trouble with any of the guests in terms of comprehending everything, go look at the transcripts first because it's going to be with the show notes, and that'll be a way you can really catch everything that they were saying.
Yeah, we at the Global Gathering, we talked about linguistic hospitality, which was to bear with people who were having a hard time understanding or expressing themselves. And Hannes and I both would encourage you to show our guests some linguistic hospitality. They all had worthwhile things to say, and I think it's worth a listen.
Another challenge that we had is just internet connectivity, because we have had guests from parts of the world where the internet is just not very stable.
And again, I think if we are presenting this in a podcast, we think it's worth your while. And so if there are some hiccups in the audio or the internet, again, the transcript will help there, but we wouldn't be putting this out there if we didn't think it was valuable. What's been both of your experience within the Alliance and even the leadership team that we're here this week with, when you've got people from a vast array of cultures all together in pursuit of this kind of Christ-likeness together? Has it been a barrier, or has it been kind of enriching to see it all come together?
I would say I have been enriched by being on this team and seeing different approaches to spirituality. As a team, one thing we're trying this week is having one person has the right of interruption to say, we're in the middle of a discussion, but we need to pray about that, so let's stop. And it's the first time I've ever done that, and I absolutely love it.
I think for all of us here around the table, the Global Gathering, which happened end of 2024, was a moment where the communal spiritual life was a real experience. And I felt there was a great willingness also to explore or to try out new things. For example, we introduced a morning liturgy. Now, I'm not sure that we would use again the term liturgy, because for some that's a loaded term. But to come together and just pray, read together a prayer morning after morning, I felt it laid the groundwork for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
It created a posture of dependence on God that was carried by, it was a good number. Not all of them, not all participants were able could participate in it, which was okay. But it was a good number of regular participants. So the willingness and the realization that we need it, if we want to make a difference in God's kingdom, if you want to serve God, to glorify His name, we need to invest in this relationship. Otherwise, it will not happen.
Yeah, those mornings in Johannesburg at the Global Gathering, I think you were not expecting the crowds that showed up at those, right? I think, didn't you have to move rooms?
Well, very quickly we had to move rooms, and I think one morning we had about a third of the participants show up, which was much, much bigger than we thought. But it was very, very special praying with such a diverse group. Those were definitely a highlight for me.
Praying, worshiping together with people from different cultures, it's just a kingdom experience,
Yes.
isn't it?
Absolutely.
Are there other topics that you two have thought of together where you want to pursue in the coming episodes of the podcast? Is there anything you haven't quite touched on yet, or something that has triggered, maybe something's come up in an interview or used to do? We should look into that more.
One thing I'd be interested in, since we started, and actually after we did the recordings, I listened to 2 podcasts that had nothing to do with our podcasts and the Global Alliance. Interviews with people who are actually committed to the topic also. And one of them has written a book that I read on the topic. So I'd love to get these guys on the podcast and learn from them in an interview. So that's something
Great
I'd
idea.
love to
Yeah.
pursue. I would assume that they would be open to meeting with us. I'm assuming it's the topic they're passionate about. So for them to learn from an organization like ours, global, that wants to pursue this, and I'm hopeful that we could have a very inspiring conversation here.
And I know you would encourage anybody listening to the podcast or anybody within the Alliance, if they have ideas for episodes or topics, you would love to be contacted, right?
Absolutely, using the email address info@wycliffe.net, but also at the end of every episode that we've done so far, there's a question that the guest that we've been interviewing asks the Alliance community, and we would love to get that conversation going more broadly than just people we're interviewing on the podcast.
Yeah, it's really a learning together podcast, and it will be so much more enriching the more people participate with their questions, with their experience, whatever, so that we can grow together in that direction.
Well, our thanks again to Hannes and Joe, not only for the interview, but for stepping out and trying something that's a little or maybe quite a bit outside of their comfort zones. We think their podcast, In the Company of Travelers, offers so much to Christian leaders around the world. So Jim, maybe you can tell people how they can find it.
There are a couple ways you can find it. One, if you go to wycliffe.net, there's a podcast page, and it's easy to click there and subscribe. And you can also find the written transcripts. And let me say, too, that those written transcripts are in English, but there are so many ways to translate material now that we are trusting that our audience will be able to translate that into whatever they want, whatever language they want. Or you can simply go to Spotify or to Apple or wherever you get your podcasts and search for In the Company of Travelers, and you can subscribe that way.
Yeah, so at any rate, we are glad to be able to tell you about it, and we hope you'll give it a listen and take away from it what is beneficial to you. And of course, we also hope you will continue to join us here for the Journey podcast, where we talk about stories, strategies, trends among Bible translation movements around the world, and many hosts of other things as well.
So thanks for listening, everyone, and we will see you next time.
Goodbye.